I bet you thought I would only go after Ethan Klein, Hassan. I don't have the beard. It doesn't work anymore.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Oh no. I'll
No,
turn
he's the moderator.
It's gonna be webcam. Yeah, I'm like the moderator.
Okay.
I guess I'm the debate. This is the clash of. This is.
Hassan Biker, I bet you thought that you were safe. Ethan called you
Dude.
out for being scared of me. You know, Ethan
Dude,
was
why-
very
why-
adamant. Why
I
don't you
can't-
debate BadEmpanada?
I can't believe I'm in the presence of such a monstrous tanky who wants the America empire to end. This
They're gonna
violent
ask you this one at
tanky.
TSA. They're gonna ask you about this one at TSA.
Yeah,
Devil
I'm
and
here-
devil
well,
and
I'm
angel.
here as a defender of the Democratic Party, specifically
We know.
Bernie SS Sanders. I'm here to defend the Democratic Party's position because I think that they're working tirelessly around the clock for a ceasefire, and I think people like BadEmpanada don't understand or appreciate that Kamala Harris would have been different. That's what I think.
I
You
mean,
concur?
yeah, that's
BadEmpanada?
precisely what I think you believe. So next time you meet Bernie Sanders, are you gonna yell at him?
No, I'm not going to yell at him because I'm not a freak, and I'm not going to yell at.
So
I'm not going to here. If you want to have an honest conversation, or a serious conversation, I had an entry point in that conversation with Bernie and AOC as well, but unfortunately they were literally late to their rally to begin with, so we didn't get to talk thoroughly about it. And I don't even know if they'll give me another interview at this point because like I have been very critical of their position on Israel, and I've been talking to other people in their like other people like Faz and numerous others behind the scenes to try to get them to engage in direct action aside from the rallies that they're organizing, because I thought that it would be beneficial both politically and also beneficial for bringing about humanity to the politics that they represent. But it would be politically beneficial for them to organize a protest or a rally or do something around the unjustifiable detention of Mahmoud Khalil. And that was actually in that 9-minute conversation that we had. That was my entry point into it. Like I was going to talk to him about this on First Amendment grounds and basically get a better assessment, better understanding of what his position is, and to maybe even talk to him further about like why he calls it, why he consistently brings about the issue of Israel, but like only focuses on Benjamin Netanyahu, or why he doesn't call it a genocide. Because these are, I think, valid questions to ask someone like Bernie Sanders, especially because my expectation of someone like Bernie Sanders is that he's supposed to be infinitely more knowledgeable on the situation than like the average Democratic Party politician is supposed to be, given his long history of being an out and about socialist, and even sometimes like offering critical support to, with some notable exceptions like Yugoslavia, offering critical support to even revolutionary socialists or even like anti-imperialist militancy throughout his career. I wanna like my expectation from him is someone who has been definitely more, dare I say, radical, even though that doesn't really mean anything in American politics. My expectation from him at this point would be to be leading the charge of stopping all aid to Israel and issuing boycotts and divestments and threatening sanctions upon Israel. But he's nowhere near there, and I think that's very disappointing as someone who was a big fan of Bernie Sanders, despite my differences in opinion with Bernie Sanders.
Well, I think, as you said very well once, that Zionists should not even be allowed to be the local dog catcher. And Bernie Sanders well eclipses the point of being a Zionist by any reasonable standard, even your standard, I'm sure. AOC, I'm not exactly sure. She seems to be a lot better than him, but
Yeah, I agree.
they are absolutely grooming her to be something that she probably didn't want to be initially, and it's working. So that's kind of sad. Sanders in like 2016, he did seem to be something that was genuinely inconvenient for the party, but they have well and truly tamed him at this point. And I think it's been that way for a while. I think even in 2020, it was already kind of like that, even though, he did still run for the nomination. He fell into line very quickly afterwards.
I think you're mistaking a lot of like Bernie's like genuine convictions and how wrong he is with him being a machine politician. Like I
mean, he can be wrong and still help the machine in the end.
No,
Like, he can
he
be
did.
apart from
He
them.
absolutely did. But I also think that Bernie Sanders is just he has this like old labor Zionist framework, I think, that is just utterly ridiculous. And that is something that he hasn't been able to shake away. But given what he has done in terms of offering support, in terms of being unafraid to endorse certain viewpoints, both on the activist front, but also on his also in terms of the people that he endorses, it almost feels like there's a sense of shame coming from him with regards to that contradiction that he recognizes to a certain degree. Maybe it's a little too parasocial, but I mean, I guess we are making analysis about politicians, so I guess that's not all that parasocial, but like he's the type of person who has these opinions, but also won't get in the way of more radical perspectives. Like he's not.
I mean, I think you're very, very generous to him. I think people are very generous to American politicians who specifically get into like a position of power, as Sanders has. Like this, as soon as they become like an elected official, like the standards for them just go through the floor. Like you expect almost nothing from them, and it's excuse after excuse after excuse. I think Americans, I think I've heard you say this before. I mean, I might be incorrect. I might just be misremembering. But Americans love to say, like love to frame themselves as being like in like an exceptional situation that someone like me simply cannot understand, and therefore our politicians need to be more shit. I don't think it's that the politicians.
That's a misunderstanding of my analysis. My job is a communicator, as is your job, right? We're trying to make a convincing argument to get people to understand our worldview. And by the way, I don't think you and I, the reason why I always will maintain the position that your video essays are brilliant, regardless of your methods or the way you present yourself online, is because I understand that you and I are on this issue and on virtually every other issue on the same side. But as a communicator, especially as a communicator that is in the United States of America, I understand the utter moral depravity of the average American. And I understand their lack of interest in these subjects. So, in order to make a more convincing argument, I always try to message to the room that I'm speaking to, if that makes sense. And I think a part of that is also to grade politicians on a curve as well. This isn't to say that they're like doing fantastic or to defend them, but there are, as you've also presented yourself, like there are certain instances where they engage in defensible actions. Like the nuance that exists between AOC and Bernie Sanders is one that you recognize as well. But if you were to ask the average person that is like against both of these people, like people that look at it and say, well, these are both politicians that exist within a bourgeois capitalist duopoly framework, they're not doing what is necessary in this situation. I apply that nuance across the board. I apply that charitability and nuance across the board to all politicians that I talk to, or all politicians that I analyze in general. Like Chris Van Hollen is a great example of this, right? He's a regular run-of-the-mill Democrat. Do I think he's a good dude? Do I think he's going to bring about like a proletarian revolution? Fuck no. But within the confines of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return, or at least like kickstarting the conversation and getting Americans to pay attention to the immigrant detention structure that we have in the United States of America, I think what Senator Chris Van Hollen did, which was to fly to El Salvador and directly demand proof of life for Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was incredibly important. Because it drove the media cycle. It led to more Americans finding out about this unjustifiable detention strategy that the administration is offering. So I guess basically what I'm saying is I understand the moral depravity of the average American and adjust my commentary appropriately to that, just like I understand the lack of interest from the average American politician in addressing any of those issues, and I grade them on a curve.
Okay, but the problem is,
people, by the way, are saying, no, you got to restart stream because you're at 12 hours. Sorry.
We just all agreed to support each other and agree with everything that each of us say always, and we're best friends and we're moving in together and we're roommates.
Yeah. I'm going to the Argentinian prison that you guys are streaming out of.
Jail.
You should just leave the US, by the way. I don't know why you don't just do that. I mean, I'm sure you have like 100 friends who you all love there, but you should just leave the US. It makes everything way easier. You can't get sued by Ethan Klein, for example.
Go to Israel.
No, I Well, I was just talking about this earlier because there was like a prominent liberal academics who study fascism are leaving the United States, and here's why. There was like a New York Times article on it, but it's like I'm stubborn. I'm a very stubborn person, and I feel like I'd rather stick it out and see where it goes rather than to leave the United States of America.
I used to think that the US actually was probably the best place to be because it's one of the few countries where you basically can't get arrested purely for speech unless you're like threatening someone. But now, no, obviously not.
Yeah, no. Now it's resembling more and more Israel every day. It's wonderful. My favorite country, the most moral nation. Am Israel high.
Yeah, so I hear you're a liberal Zionist, Hassan. So
going
how do
back
I
to
get
wait, going back to what we were talking about. Going back to what we were talking about. The point I was
You
trying
said
to
a
make is
whole
that,
thing. I
like,
never got the chance to respond.
yeah, exactly.
what it
Like
was at
with
this
Chris
point.
Van Hollen, do you understand my perspective or like the framework that I operate off of? Like
You're
where I
saying
make
that one individual thing that he did was a good thing, basically.
Yeah. I don't shy away from politicians unless they're like insane. You know what I mean? Unless it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I guess, and I'm gonna look like a fucking clown ass. I don't shy away from giving credit to politicians and offering positive reinforcement to politicians when I feel like they're doing something that I think is appropriate, like moving the needle in the direction, because it's the same framework that I operate with within the Democratic Party, where like these are the available platforms of influence, and I will always go there because as long as our interests align, I have no issue going to those platforms, because at the end of the day, they are giving more legitimacy to myself than vice versa, in my opinion.
I mean, giving you legitimacy, like what's the point of that really? What is the point of them giving you legitimacy if in the end you do kind of demonstrate support for them in many cases? That's the thing. I think people see you very much as a Bernie Sanders guy, even though that is sort of contradicted by what you said earlier. Maybe it's erroneous, but people very much see you as like a big Bernie Sanders supporter. I wouldn't say I see you as like a big Bernie Sanders supporter. I think I see you more as someone who maybe doesn't like what he says, but is a little iffy on making that clearer, which I think you sort of did just a second ago. I think you preempted everything I've said about you and you were ready with that. It's cheating in a debate, by the way.
No, I actually have talked about this quite a bit, even before and after your statements, as a matter of fact. But you know how it is with clips. You probably don't get that from...
I mean, I do watch what you say sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I don't click, like I don't go to any place that posts like a clip saying, I don't think that such a place would even exist. Like Hassan Piker says positive thing about Bernie Sanders. Here's a 20-second clip of it. I don't know what place would that be.
But I talk for 8 hours a day. It's very hard for you to in any, like, unless you're watching 8 hours a day, you're probably not going to see the exact same thing that I told you just now. I've spoken about probably 25 to 35 times whenever some chatter comes in and annoys me, and then I go on a fucking long and convoluted rant about.
You should stop reading your chat, by the way.
Yeah, that's part of the puzzle. That's part of how I do this back and forth. But
I like
it's difficult
just right now, real quick.
What's up?
Like BadEmpanada, you made like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 videos talking about the AOC Bernie interview, and then I don't know how much you watch of Hassan talking about it, but like just talking to each other now, clearing that up. Do you feel like that clears up anything now that you see that he's kind of...
No, not really, because I think a lot of that, like there was the initial reaction of the interview, and there was like responses to people who want Hassan, responses to people like who want Hassan but were defending sort of like the whole idea of like engaging with the mainstream Democratic Party and like sort of trying to pull people to your side from them and stuff like that. And that was basically the whole thing there. It wasn't so much like I said something, Hassan said something, and I responded to it. It was more like that. What I would say is that Americans are way too optimistic with their former politicians. And if there is something that you should preach, it's that these people are ultimately fucking useless and you're going to have to do shit yourself.
Yeah,
so what does that look like?
Here's the thing.
Heard of
I understand.
Mario's brother?
What?
Sorry, go ahead, Hassan.
No, I understand that like the modern Democratic Party is entirely useless. The Democratic Party is well, it's not entirely useless. They can be put to good use on select issues or across the board, maybe one day it could, in a totally idealistic world, they could be a functional working labor party. Obviously, we're not there, and we might never get there. And I don't disagree with that. But this is, I just wanted to offer clarity on the framework that I operate off of, because I think that you and I both will recognize that Americans don't have a semblance of class consciousness. And I feel like at this stage, the most important thing you can do is to pull people back from reactionary discourse, pull people back from reactionary ideals. And the best possible way to do that is by constantly reasserting the position over and over again that the Democratic Party has to have a class first politics, and also that these people that have been targeted as like vulnerable populations, marginalized identities that are presented as your enemy are not actually your enemy at all. It's simply a red herring, a distraction that the reactionary forces uses, and the Democrats are wholly incompetent at dealing with, because they don't have this class first politic.
Okay. First thing here is that the whole reason why you have this idea that you have to you're sort of stuck into working with the Democratic Party, it's not your fault, obviously, because you aren't every single person in the fucking United States of America, but this is sort of like a self-perpetuating circular logic. And I mean, I'm not blaming you for having, every American has it. It's like, we have to work within the Democratic Party because it's the only thing that's there. And then you do not do anything, or you don't build an alternative to that. And you just keep reinforcing the initial premise over and over again. So Americans are stuck in this sort of rut where it seems like it's completely unrealistic to ever challenge the two-party system, so they don't try. And this is just sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, because doing something like that takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of people. But this whole Democratic Party upright, people like Bernie Sanders as well, very much reinforce this, even if perhaps at some point he didn't mean to. Perhaps at some point he was really genuinely trying to challenge the status quo. And he only joined the Democratic Party because he thought he had to win the primaries. It's the only possible way. As an independent, he had no chance. He probably didn't in that moment. But then there's also the fact that logic gets you into this rut where you never, ever try to do anything else. And there are many other countries where that had very strong two-party systems that in some cases lasted for like hundreds of years. The two-party system in the USA is younger than in some of those countries that broke it. And they very slowly worked from the ground up, like starting with local politics, building up to like the state level, building up to like the national level, building alternative structures, using the political capital they got from that, not like immediately running for president, nothing else, like the fucking Green Party or something. What a fucking joke that is. Like, they do nothing but run for the main office. But what I mean is, like, you have to start small, you have to build up from that until you can eventually challenge on the main stage. Now, the issue of this logic from me now is that it's too late. Honestly, I'm not sure that we have time for this sort of thing before the consequences of climate change basically take over the agenda entirely, and whatever political system we're trying to get into in this way just totally breaks down. So, I guess people should still do it. But what I'm trying to say is Americans have like this circular logic that very much serves the Democratic Party as well. It is so good for them. And I think that by sort of working with people like Bernie Sanders, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, irrespective of who they are, as individuals, of whether they are genuine or not genuine, and whether they are great people or not, whether they truly believe in some of the shit stuff that they perhaps forced into advocating for just to stay in line with the Democratic Party, all of that doesn't really matter, because ultimately what they do is they serve this purpose where they give people this idea that you have your voice in the party. You have your voice here in the party already. AOC is there for you. Bernie is there for you. They're already fighting for you. You don't have to do that much yourself. Maybe you can go to the protest yourself. Maybe you can do something like that. But by golly, you do not try to make your own party. You don't try to do something independently. You don't try to like build an apparatus entirely independent of the party, not like the DSA, but entirely independent of it, where you actually build it into something that can meaningfully threaten them and the two-party system, and thus meaningfully start putting pressure on your government to actually really do something internationally as well. And Americans have really failed at that more so than any people in the world, which is, I think, like people say, like the US is the belly of the beast. It's hard to do this. I don't think that's true at all. For one, until Trump, the US had the best free speech laws in the entire world, pretty much. You can say basically anything. That's a great environment for that sort of thing. It's a really good environment for that sort of thing, if anything. Obviously, the electoral college is fucked. That makes it a lot
Everybody
harder.
liked the stream.
But
like
I
the
mean,
stream and donate.
Americans never even really tried to get to the steps before that, which is like the Senate and Congress, where those things are less bad. So I feel like there is absolutely a failure in the US for whatever reason. Obviously, people and fucking Twitter Marxists would tell you that's just the way it is. It's a bourgeois controlled political system, whatever. But whatever the reason is, the US is the country, and the people of the US have the most power politically as a bloc of anyone in the world to get shit done for people in other countries. But paradoxically, they do nothing. And
I by the way, I agree with everything that you said. And it is also a part of my vision. That's why I talked about class consciousness and instilling class consciousness, and also working on building movements outside of the party, and not like community organizing, even though that can be valuable as well, but specifically labor unions, and building a network of pressure that could actually that actually creates maybe even down the line a third party. I'm not against this at all, and this is not something that I
don't
stand
think
in
you
opposition
are.
to, with the exception of what you just mentioned, the Green Party, obviously, because I think the Green Party they're jokesters who only come around every 4 years. I mean, I think this is yet another it's just another point of like not knowing the full scope of my perspective on
No,
this.
like I'm not here to argue with you. I'm not here to argue with a clip of you or something. I'm talking to
Yeah,
you
no, exactly,
about
and I'm telling you,
these
like
things. And
I agree with you completely, and that's a part of
because
my
we're in
framework.
what I was responding to there was what you said about making the Democratic Party more class conscious specifically. I think
Yeah, I
just
think
throw
that
that out the
that's
window. Forget about it.
impossible. It's virtually impossible. That's why I said it would happen only in an idealistic society. But my goal is to use the platform that I have and expand on it so that I can once again move people away from reactionary politics and help them focus on a class first politics. And wherever that goes, if there is a mechanism that can push the Democratic Party into actual submission to class first politics, then that's great. If that doesn't work, and there's an alternative, if there's an alternative third party out there, the only way that they will reach viability if it's backed by a strong labor movement that actually engages in labor militancy. And even then, I'm not entirely confident that like this can happen in the United States of America. But the reason why I speak on my perspective in the way that I do is because I'm speaking to Americans. And unfortunately, you got to make a lot of burger analogies if you want to get Americans on board. You have to give them hamburgers. Americans are either repulsed by what they perceive to be left politics. I'm not even talking about like revolutionary socialism. I'm talking straight up like basic bare minimum social democratic functions that are afforded by every other comparable OECD state is seen as like radical in this country. Socialism in and of itself is seen as a pejorative in this country. That's why people say like Nancy Pelosi's the worst thing imaginable. She's a socialist. Like obviously that kind of stuff is really stupid, but I think it's indicative of the average American's perspective on this stuff, considering that, America won the Cold War and this is the imperial core, and therefore most of our working class is just either completely oblivious to class politics in and of itself, and utterly confused by the notion of class consciousness, or they're incredibly angry at even the thought of it. Like they are repulsed by it, they get mad about it, which is why I have to temper my commentary on this front.
Well, I think you got to be careful with this notion of class politics in the US, and for a completely different reason to what you said as well, because there is an element to the present system where Americans benefit greatly from doing things to other countries, or they could at least. They in many ways they don't, because Americans are too dumb to even advocate for getting their own fair share from imperialism. But
I talk about that all the time too. Yeah,
there's two options here, which is like you can appeal to Americans, as in like I'm gonna get you a bigger share. That's Bernie Sanders. I'm gonna get you a bigger share of the spoils.
yeah.
Or you could appeal to Americans in a way where like they perhaps see beyond national lines and understand themselves as part of a broader whole of the world. And I think if you like what you were talking about with unions, for example, the average American labor union is like it's basically like I wouldn't even call it a union, like in terms of like
Grace
the
calls
sort of
them,
things
Grace
that you could
calls them
imagine.
pig unions, which is not like cop unions, but like corporate unions or unions that are completely servile to the interests of the Democratic Party under the
Oh,
AFL-CIO.
not even just that. Like unions are themselves, in general, obviously narrowly focus on the interests of their members. So that's why you get things like the American Big Tent labor unions being like, oh, like let's get the Lockheed Martin float at a parade or whatever. A huge victory for the Lockheed Martin employees. 10%
Okay, well,
raise.
you're mixing and matching a couple different things, but yes, I know what you mean. Of course, yeah.
Well, what I'm saying here is that what you were going on about there was about class politics in the USA. I need to get people on board with this idea that socialism isn't bad. I think you're looking far too much into the future with that rhetoric because I'm not even thinking about fucking socialism right now, and people think I'm like a radical communist. Like, I'm not thinking about any of that shit right now. There's so many more immediate concerns that we have to work with, the systems that we have now. Ultimately, I have no faith in Americans of ever doing anything, unfortunately. Like, if you ask me, what are your solutions? I don't have solutions for you, buddy. We have a limited amount of time before she hits the fan. I would have thought previously that something like what is happening in Gaza would cause like a Vietnam level like cultural like schism in the US. It hasn't actually caused it anywhere, not even in Europe where places,
it took 20 years, and also there was direct involvement with Americans actually going there to fight, which I think is the reason why there was a lot more resistance. Americans are inherently very selfish people, and until they're drawn into the fight themselves in a way that is more meaningful with a draft, not just like the poverty draft, or not just necessarily like a bunch of people that want to get a communications degree for free going out there and getting their dicks blown off while defending some fucking poppy field in the Karengal Valley, but like literally a draft. Only then will selfish Americans actually get up to aggressively protest in a militant fashion in a way that would truly harm the overall interests of the American State Department.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's just materialism in the end. China is extremely good at using the global system that the US set up, so why would they want to challenge it? That's how it is with everything. The Arab states, half of them are US puppets, the other half, they would probably get annihilated if they tried to do anything uncoordinated without the US puppet states helping them. In many other cases, like I feel like Israel has become something of an inconvenience for its allies at this point, but they're sort of too far in to really do anything about it at this, like, you know, it's been like 50, 60, 70 years of nothing but full support for Israel. So at this point, you know, what are they going to do, especially given that they would have to be, like the US would have to be the one to really pull the plug, and that's not going to fucking do it, is it? So, I mean, it's probably like the bleakest situation that I could imagine right now. Obviously, like Americans theoretically as a block of people, like average Americans have a decent amount of power to challenge this, but they also themselves have no real reason, no real motivation for doing so, because ultimately, you know, what you said about Vietnam probably rings true. It does not affect them that much. It affects some of them psychologically, and that is about it. They don't see any material consequences from it. You know, there has not been like a massive adverse reaction that could turn them against it.
There's no situation historically that has existed where the captive population has been this thoroughly, at least in contemporary history that I can think of, where the captive population has been this thoroughly ethnically cleansed in broad daylight without any sort of material support to offer from other countries, right? Like you have no Cuban example, you have no USSR example, and the role that they might have played in the ANC's efforts to resist against the apartheid structure in South Africa. So very, very different set of circumstances here. And this coming also after the expanded surveillance state in the aftermath of the war on terror, with a shit ton of social conditioning that Americans totally signed off on. This kind of attitude is reflected broadly in American society or in Western society in general. But that's the silver lining that I see, because in spite of all of that, I think there's only so much dead children that the average Americans can can look at and go, this is completely unacceptable. Like, this is fucked up. Now, you're not wrong when you say there's not enough mobilization happening, and you're not wrong on that. But I do think that given how much the public sentiment has shifted in such a short period of time, I think that there is still always, like, it's something that I will always push for, regardless of how hopeless I feel, is to mobilize Americans.
You can try your best. It is absolutely true that in an ideal world, like the number one way to fight this would be to mobilize people in the US, Europe, Australia, Canada, these places which Israel's primary backers. And, many of us have mobilized. Many people have tried to do stuff, protested and stuff. But clearly, these governments are immune to this sort of pressure at this point. They don't give a shit about it. Like, it's because really almost nothing has really changed. But my point is, like, when you have basically like both of the most important judicial bodies in international law and with serious cases against Israel, and you also have like hundreds of thousands of people in the street protesting in almost every single one of the countries that is supporting Israel, in some cases like week after week, it's clear that something has shifted here, and like from how things were 30 to 40 years ago especially. And the number one thing that I can think of is somehow the internet has made it easier to ignore this shit. I can't exactly articulate how exactly, but it's obviously the most prominent change in the world aside from the fall of the Soviet Union, which is probably bigger, I forgot where I was going with that, actually. I'm a fucking moron.
Well,
but what I was going to say was like, no, I don't know what I was going to say.
Okay.
Well,
what I was going to say is
perception.
I recognize all of that. And part of why I try to communicate these issues in the way that I do, even though I say almost the exact same things that you have said so far in this conversation, not signing off on everything that you say off stream or on social media.
You disagree with?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
We can get to that, but we're having a productive conversation right now. But we
have to yell at each other. I have to speak. I have to play video clips over you like Ethan Klein did.
Yeah. I'll move into that in a second. But the reason why, for example, why did I broach the subject of Israel with Bernie on First Amendment grounds and the unlawful detention and possible deportation of Mahmoud Khalil? Because I understand Bernie Sanders' position. I don't agree with it, and I think it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous position to have. It's repulsive to maintain the idea that Israel has a right to defend itself 19 months into Israel's...
Yeah, have you seen the videos of how Bernie talks to pro-Palestine protesters?
Yeah, I have. From like 2000 and there's like one from like
some of them are recent.
There's one that's more recent where people come up to him while he's walking, but he's an old curmudgeon. Yeah,
I don't know if I would call it that. I think it's the topic.
You know what I think it is
that he knows he can't talk about.
You know what I think it is? I think it's what Bernie did to the average Democrat and the resentment that the average Democrat feels when Bernie is mentioned, because it shows their hollowed out nature of their politics. Pro-Palestinian protesters do to Bernie. I think he recognizes that deep down inside that those people are right and he's fucking wrong, and it pisses him off. Or maybe he just genuinely sees them. Yeah. Or he just genuinely sees them as a hurdle, and that he has the right mind on this. But what I will say is this: when you go to those rallies where he has 32,000 people showing up, right, in red states, blue states, all around the country, the people at those rallies are far closer to the truth on the issue of Israel and Palestine than Bernie Sanders himself is, which is why I see that as an opportunity to talk to those people there. I see that as I see Bernie Sanders as simply a person that is capable of bringing all of these people together. And with the exception of American foreign policy, which is very significant for someone like myself, obviously, I see Bernie as a uniting figure that can be used to build a more robust movement to actually get more Americans that are liberals on board with some of these other ideas. And I think imperialism plays a formative role in that politics, in the politics of the socialist left, of course, because I mean the alternative argument to the labor aristocracy, like Americans recognizing their class position, but then also recognizing their class position on an international scale and how much they benefit from the unequal exchange globally. The alternative to that also is that every dollar spent on global war and the extraction of natural resources and all of that endless bounty that doesn't even translate to America's material conditions improving could be a dollar spent directly on fixing the roads, fixing the potholes. A dollar spent on a bomb could be spent on educational material for children, better schools, a better ISP system, more robust welfare states. So this is like it's such an easy flip once you get Americans to that point, I think. And that's why I, regardless of my disagreements with Bernie Sanders, still hold some respect for him for being able to put this kind of politics in the forefront in a country like the United States of America, where I feel like before his 2016 run, positioning himself against like the establishment Democrats, it seemingly was a rudderless ship heading down the same, I guess, like necro state that we have become, regardless of Bernie running. But at least now there is like more leftist organizing in the country, whether it be a more robust PSL movement, DSA, and even more unionization, even though our labor union participation rate is pretty fucking low.
Okay, let me grant. Let's just. I don't care to argue like a lot of the stuff that you said because honestly, I don't think it really matters. But
1 point to
okay,
Hassan.
the left movement in the U.S. is bigger now. Let's say that's the case. You know, the PSL and all these other things. It looks really positive, bright for the future. Does it though? Has this changed anything? Has anything meaningfully happened as a result of this? If anything, things have probably gotten worse, I would say. So maybe me and your idea that the US is the place where something meaningful could happen is completely, utterly, and just totally wrong in reality.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a more pessimistic attitude, and there are definitely days where I feel that way, but I try not to succumb to that feeling and still push on, knowing full well that like, look, this movement is still marginal, is still tiny, but it grows every single day, and that's ultimately a good thing because who knows where we might be at. And at the end of the day, the least that the American left could do is like try to get concessions and to try to get America to step away to the best of our ability from the global stage when the decline of empire is setting in.
If you want to get concessions, the best thing to do is to immediately, each and every one of you, break with the Democratic Party already now and get to work. You've had decades to do it. It's probably too late, but why not try? Because what you're doing right now isn't doing anything anyway. So what's the difference? You want a great example?
I'm not against that.
Precisely. I'm not saying you're not. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Everything doesn't have to be a yelling match.
Yeah, I think Bernie probably is the best possible option we had to do that too.
I mean, there was in 2016. I even thought like he might be something special. He might have been if he had been elected. He might have been different. He had the balls back then to call out obvious shit like there was a coup in Bolivia, basic shit like that literally no one else in the US was saying.
Yeah,
stuff like that. And since then, he's just sort of become a shadow of himself. I mean, he's old as well.
Or even running as a major party candidate, running to
like the Democrats chose to lose rather than let him win. It's just a shame that after that he didn't really do anything. Like if anything, that experience turned him into more of an establishment guy than he was before, and that's just sad. But I mean,
I fear that if the only alternative is socialism or barbarism, right? I fear that without proper political education, without any class consciousness, without any mechanisms of pushback, without any sort of like structural organizing on the labor front, that when all of this crumbles inevitably, and I do think it will, all we will have is a fascist movement, and that's already kind of happening anyway. So that's my big fear, and that's what I try to. That's why I try to do everything in my power to, one, talk to international leftist movements, regardless of how social democratically aligned they are, or even people like Mélenchon, in an effort to try to get people to organize and move in the positive direction, even if change doesn't seem immediate.
Well, I think I'm not specifically accusing you here or anything, but if there's one thing that you could do with your content that might maybe help you use the position that you're in to do something that might actually matter, it is really actually start encouraging people to work outside of the Democratic Party and lead by example as well. Like, if you're going to talk to Bernie Sanders again, scream at him in the face. Scream at him. Scream. Use that one opportunity. Like, I mean, how many more chances you can have to talk to Bernie Sanders, really, right?
He's very old. He is very old.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think I'll
screaming at him.
okay, I don't mean like literally scream at him, but I mean get combative. Put on a public spectacle of it.
I think,
you know,
well, see, that's what
give him a Kanye West. George Bush doesn't care about black people. Why not?
I think Ash Sarkar had a really productive conversation with Bernie that people use all the time, where she presented some of these questions because she had a longer, like, an opportunity to have a longer conversation with him. If
think
I'm
he
not
wouldn't have that with you? You're way bigger than her.
Yeah, I think because he's had that conversation once already, he's probably
Scared.
a little bit more worried. Or, I mean, I don't think he would run away from having that conversation with me either. It's just that I guess the planets haven't aligned. But yeah, no, I think that it's important to ask these questions. I don't think it's unproductive. That was never my.
I don't think it's that important to talk to him about Israel specifically, because obviously he's steadfast in that.
Well, I did bring up
I think the most important thing to do
thing
would be the third party thing. And
no, I did ask him that.
Did you?
Yeah, that was the other. Because those are my two main questions. Was like, what kind of initiatives does he want to? The three questions I have for Bernie and for AOC in general, but like especially for Bernie, were do you think that, you know, we could build a robust third party movement in this country, and like what are the steps to take to do so? And then the other question was obviously going to be about like what are the direct actions that they want to engage with in terms of tackling the issue of like how this administration is using Israel as a way to undermine the First Amendment, because that is precisely what's happening. Like I am trying to frame it I'm trying to frame these questions, or try to get people to ask these questions within the framework of American understanding, like recognizing the selfishness of the average American, recognizing American exceptionalism and American individualism. I think that those are areas that bear fruit. That's something that creates a lot of resentment for average Americans, because like, but the way to get Americans, the way to engage Americans on this issue, the best possible way to do that is by, one, talking about tax dollars being spent there because they're very selfish and that's something that pisses them off, and two, talk about how this foreign nation has an incredible amount of power over American politics, and that the current administration is using defending Israel as a way to erode civil liberties that Americans enjoy. So that's what I'm trying to do.
I feel like if you appeal to people on the basis of their selfishness, then you're going to have to keep engaging with them on that basis. And,
no, that's just to broach the conversation, to open up the door to.
Okay, but you broach the conversation, right? So it's kind of like you're intentionally approaching it from a position that you yourself don't really believe is the right way to do it. And I think that makes things more difficult for you down the line as well. Or at least maybe not you specifically, like, you know, this is how you engage as a broader movement, like as a intentional strategy among many different people and groups, engaging people in this way, like, hey, Israel is bad because we spend a ton of money on it and we don't get enough back in return. You know, okay, then what happens if there is another instance of imperialism? Well, yeah, I know that's not what you mean, but that's sort of the message that you're saying to people when you're like, okay, we send these tax dollars to Israel. They could go to Medicare in the USA. We could have universal health care instead of that, or whatever. Okay, it's that sort of thing. Like, you're appealing to the innate American selfishness that all of them are born with due to their innate Americanness. I agree with that part. So like, you engage with them on that level, and I feel like you're starting from a position that makes it a lot more difficult for you to get through to them from there and get them onto like a right path where they might actually do something meaningful. And this is ultimately why you should give up on Americans and leave.
I'm not going to do that until
you're going to.
I mean, who knows what'll happen? Who knows what'll happen? If my former podcast co-host gets his wishes, I'll probably be in fucking jail. I'll probably be under the jail expeditiously.